Welcome back. In this half of the show, we're focusing on solutions to world hunger. How do you make a dent in the number of hungry people in the world when that number is approaching 1 billion? Well, there was something called the Millennium Development Goal of halving the number by 2015, but many are finding that goal a bit difficult to reach. To achieve it, the FAO Food Summit in Rome in June of 2008 proposed a two-track response to the crisis. Firstly, boost production by investing in the agricultural sector and rural development. Secondly, ensure immediate access to food for the poor and vulnerable in both rural and urban areas. The report also suggested governments should support small-scale industries which produce food of good nutritional quality. In addition, it talked about promoting breastfeeding and providing educational messages on adequate nutrition. Still with us, our guests in Rome, Mark Smulders; in London, Christy Peacock; and in New York is Jeffrey Glick. Thanks for staying with us for the second half. Christy Peacock, I'm going to go back to you first of all. I think there's got to be a lot of change if this is to be dealt with properly, and I suspect one of the first things that needs to be changed, and you can give us the view from Africa, is human behaviour. When you've got countries spending more on weapons than they are on food, when you've got conflicts and all this, it's human behaviour that's got to change first, isn't it?
Indeed. I mean, Africa, very unfortunately, suffers from, in many cases, relatively poor leadership, and the voice of the farmer and the voice of rural people generally is quite weak in political debate and discourse in Africa. And farmers, smallholder farmers, generally are not very well organised. They don't necessarily form powerful lobbying groups advocating on their own behalf, and so you do see that these issues of rural poverty and agricultural production are neglected within the political debates in many countries in Africa, and it's a great shame. There needs to be concerted leadership, political leadership by African leaders, and it's only in that way that people are going to get out of poverty, I think.
Yeah, it needs a steady hand. Jeffrey Glick over in New York, a stable platform, I guess, is what you'd need before you start throwing money. Is there any point throwing money into places like, I don't know, Darfur, Somalia, the Congo, when clearly there is conflict on the ground which is going to stop that money and stop that aid getting to the people who need it?
Well, absolutely, because the conflict doesn't completely stop the aid, and the people that need it even more so during times of conflict. This is the entire principle of humanitarian aid, is that you're helping people that have the least access and the least recourse to help themselves. In Congo, which is one of our, DR Congo is one of the biggest countries and biggest programs that we're running, and the aid has been very important in making sure that there aren't millions more that are dying from hunger.
But does it
not? Our approach is a triage basis.
Sorry, Mr. Glick, does it not, I guess, frustrate you is the word? I mean, Congo is a great example. Recently, you had rebels fighting government troops there, people fleeing. They weren't able to get. They were going into other countries to get help, and it just must feel like throwing good money after bad sometimes.
Congo is a great, horrible example, and you're absolutely right. That is, of course, very discouraging and disheartening to see the work that we're doing really laid to waste by this kind of frankly unnecessary conflict. And you're absolutely right. The political solutions are key for there to be lasting solutions. But in the meantime, there are many innocent people that are suffering. And we feel that there is a moral, you talked about moral at the beginning, there's a moral obligation for us to come together and try and help these people that have no recourse and nobody to advocate on their behalf.
Let's stay with this idea about...
in a situation like Congo.
Sure. Let's stay with this idea. Sure. Unfortunately, I'm using this phrase of throwing money. But Mark Smulders, you talked about money before. You talked about that 30 billion a year, which you felt was needed. Tell me exactly how that would be used, because I think there's a lot of perception that money is pledged, money is given, and it's not used properly. Does it have proper checks and balances? Are there almost like instructions with go with it? This is how this money needs to be used.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to emphasize, of course, peace and stability, good governance is #1. And our report actually talks of the threats and opportunities of the current crisis. And there are a tremendous amount of opportunities that could be addressed. Yes, the Congo, Somalia, these are horrible cases that have lasted for far too long. But 1 in 3 Africans suffer from hunger throughout the continent. And there's tremendous opportunity for the agricultural sector to do a lot better than it's doing right now. There's also possibilities for reducing losses, for giving better access to markets, for increasing infrastructure. So number one investment really is, I would say, in inputs, of course, making sure farmers have access to credit, seeds and fertilizers to produce. The technologies we've got, the varieties are there, farmers simply need access to the productive capacity. Then they of course need to be able to market their food, and markets simply not working very well. Roads are in horrible shape, processing facilities are insufficient, so there's real investment needed in a productive way, and it's possible. There's plenty of opportunity for that. There simply hasn't been enough attention, not just from a national government perspective where insufficient investment has been made in agriculture, but also from an international perspective. A lot of money has been pledged by the G8, by the June summit, but it's not forthcoming.
Okay, so we're starting to get into the area of infrastructure and investment, which is good. That's another whole topic to look at. Christy Peacock, let me ask you about some examples in Africa. Egypt, for example, a country which has plenty of water, it has a good climate, it has fertile land, yet they seem to be diversifying more into construction projects and things like that. Does there need to be more of a focus about using the resources that a country actually has?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there needs to be a much more of a comprehensive and to some degree integrated approach to developing rural areas. Infrastructure is absolutely critical to get inputs in and outputs out. Skills, building skills, developing farmer organisations, all this kind of work has got to be done, and this is what we do on the ground day in, day out in Farm Africa, seeing remarkable success all the time. It's deeply frustrating that it isn't given the priority that it deserves.
Does it need to be education as well, or do we keep focusing on Africa here? Obviously that's your area. Is there enough education, enough knowledge, particular know-how for those countries that's already there, or could they benefit from more knowledge?
I think there's always need to improve skills and improve knowledge and develop capacity to take these things forward at a local level without endless external support. And I think a legacy, if you like, of the underinvestment for over the last 20 years has been an erosion and a running down of a lot of African capacity, both in the research area as well as in the extension and getting new technologies out to farmers. And there's a lot of technology out there, but it's not reaching people. And when it does reach them, then things can really change.
Okay, so that's the countries which can help themselves. Let's go to Jeffrey Glick in New York. What about countries which essentially can't help themselves? You've touched on this earlier, that the humanitarian issues, the people who just need an injection of aid and money. Is that the way to work it with those countries? Just keep giving them the aid? I mean, how do you promote sustainability and infrastructure in places which are, say, hit by drought or something like that?
Well, the countries that are hit by drought, the droughts are often predictable. You can't necessarily predict when the drought will hit, but regions that suffer from drought, that's not a secret. I mean, in fact, we started earlier by talking about food crises in conflict zones. The truth is that the largest portion of nutritional crises are the result of seasonal hunger. Certainly that's what our work has shown. These are predictable patterns of hunger, the period between when one crop harvest comes up and when the farmers put the next crop in the ground, and the fact that there's not enough food available on the local markets. And the work that we do in organizations like Christy's organization and along with the food security strategies that you discussed in your introduction are in part how you make sure that this support is sustainable. You know, the work that we're doing, it's important that we're not a food distribution organization. You know, we're not a food aid organization. We do triage. We're dealing with literally children 1 to 5 that are starving to death. They're wasting away. And you can't, you know, that you have to address immediately. But the food security components, making sure there's access to clean water, that's crucial. Without that, you're right, it becomes hopeless. But when you put those pieces together, when you put food security together, when you put the water and sanitation component together with nutrition, you're building lasting solutions.
I want to just get a final quick thought from Mark Smulders, because as I said at the start of the show, this was the report that came from your organisation. Let's say you put out a similar report in a year's time. You've already told us you think the numbers quite possibly won't improve. Do you think the attitudes will have improved? The types of things we discussed about human behaviour changing and actually focusing on this problem?
Of course, we hope so. I mean, this does require a change in attitude. Unfortunately, with everyone preoccupied with financial markets, with economic slowdown, it will be very difficult to keep the focus also on the Hungary and the developing countries who need our attention. And I think one change of attitude would be to really think of reduce hunger, reduce poverty in the developing world will make the entire world better off, will create more peace and stability, less unrest in response to food crisis. So I think it's tremendously important also for ourselves, who are much better off, to recognize that development really pays off for all of us. But that does require a constant reminder that there are large numbers of people out there who haven't got the minimum they need to live a decent life.
Indeed. Constant reminders, that's what we'll attempt to keep doing, at least from our side. Many thanks to all my guests for joining us. Mark Smulders, Christy Peacock and Jeffrey Glick. And thank you, our viewer, for joining us for this edition of Inside Story. Your comments, your suggestions, why not send them to us? The email address is insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team, goodbye for now.